Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a glittering carpet of ambition and dreams. At 42, he commanded a financial empire worth $12 billion, yet the vast apartment felt emptier than ever. The silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the distant hum of traffic 30 floors below. 3 years had passed since Eleanor's funeral, but her absence still echoed through every marble corridor and mahogany-paneled room. The penthouse that once buzzed with dinner parties and charity galas now stood as a monument to solitude. Marcus had thrown himself into work, acquiring companies and closing deals with the same intensity he once reserved for loving his wife. But success, he discovered, made a poor companion during sleepless nights. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, its resonant tones reminding Marcus that he should have left for his morning run 20 minutes ago. His personal trainer would be waiting in the building's private gym, ready to put him through another punishing workout designed to exhaust both body and mind. Physical pain had become his preferred method of drowning out the constant whisper of loneliness. He turned from the window and headed toward his bedroom, loosening his silk tie as he walked. The Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished marble floors, each step echoing in the cavernous space. Eleanor had chosen every piece of furniture, every painting, every crystal chandelier with meticulous care. She had possessed an eye for beauty that transformed their home into something resembling a museum of fine living. Now it felt more like a mausoleum. Marcus pushed open the door to the master suite, already mentally preparing for another day of board meetings and conference calls. Wellington Industries never slept, and neither, it seemed, did he. Sleep brought dreams, and dreams brought memories of Eleanor's laughter filling these same rooms. Work provided the blessed numbness of constant motion. The bedroom remained exactly as Eleanor had left it. Her perfume bottles still stood arranged on the vanity, catching the morning light like tiny crystal soldiers. Her books lay stacked on the nightstand, bookmarks still protruding from novels she would never finish. Marcus had instructed the staff to leave everything untouched, creating a shrine to a love story that ended too soon. He walked to his closet, a space larger than most people's bedrooms, and selected his workout clothes. The routine had become mechanical, each action performed without conscious thought. Gray athletic shorts, black compression shirt, running shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The uniform of a man trying to outrun his ghosts. As he changed clothes, Marcus caught his reflection in the full-length mirror that Eleanor had insisted they install. She claimed it made the room feel larger, but Marcus suspected she simply enjoyed watching him dress each morning. The memory brought a familiar ache to his chest, sharp and unexpected after all this time. His phone buzzed against the marble nightstand, displaying the name of his personal assistant. Rebecca Chun had worked for Wellington Industries for 8 years, managing his schedule with military precision and an uncanny ability to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, how completely work had consumed his life since Eleanor's death. "Good morning, Rebecca," he answered, already knowing she was calling about the day's agenda. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington. I wanted to confirm your schedule before the market opens. The Tokyo acquisition team is requesting a video conference at 10:30, and the board meeting has been moved to 2 o'clock to accommodate Senator Morrison's availability." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar pressure of another overpacked day. "Fine. What about the Charity Foundation meeting? Moved to Thursday at Eleanor's foundation headquarters." Mrs. Patterson insisted on the change to accommodate the new scholarship recipients' interviews. The mention of Eleanor's foundation sent another pang through his chest. The scholarship program had been Eleanor's passion project, her way of ensuring that brilliant children from disadvantaged backgrounds could attend the best universities. Marcus had continued funding it after her death, but he rarely attended the meetings anymore. Seeing those young faces, so full of hope and potential, reminded him too much of the children he and Eleanor had planned to have. "That's fine," he said, pulling on his running shoes. "Anything else? Your housekeeper called in sick today. Apparently, she's dealing with a family emergency and won't be available for the rest of the week. She's sending a replacement from the agency." Marcus paused in tying his shoelaces. Mrs. Rodriguez had been their housekeeper for 6 years, arriving from the same agency that had provided Eleanor with a parade of domestic staff during their early years of marriage. Eleanor had eventually settled on Mrs. Rodriguez because of her discretion and attention to detail. The older woman understood the importance of maintaining the penthouse's pristine condition while respecting the privacy of its inhabitants. Did she provide any details about the replacement? Only that the agency is sending one of their most trusted employees, someone with excellent references and experience with high-profile clients. Fine, Marcus said, though the prospect of a stranger moving through Eleanor's carefully curated spaces made him uncomfortable. I'll probably be gone most of the day anyway. After ending the call, Marcus grabbed his water bottle and headed for the private elevator that connected his penthouse to the building's amenities. The elevator descended silently, its mirrored walls reflecting his image from multiple angles. He looked tired, he realized. Not just physically exhausted, but worn down in ways that sleep and exercise couldn't address. The gym occupied half of the building's 28th floor, equipped with everything a fitness enthusiast could desire. State-of-the-art cardio machines faced floor-to-ceiling windows, offering spectacular views of Central Park and the East River. Free weights, cable machines, and specialized equipment filled the remaining space, creating a private fitness sanctuary for the building's wealthy residents. Marcus's trainer, David Kim, was already waiting, clipboard in hand, and disapproval written across his face. David had been training professional athletes before Marcus hired him, and he brought the same no-nonsense intensity to their sessions that had helped Olympic competitors claim gold medals. "You're late," David said without preamble, his Korean accent still noticeable after 15 years in America. "I'm aware," Marcus replied, setting his water bottle on a nearby bench. "What's the damage today?" "Cardio and core. Your stress levels are showing in your posture, and your endurance numbers from last week were disappointing." Marcus appreciated David's directness. Unlike most people in his orbit, the trainer felt no need to soften his words or cater to his ego. David treated him like any other client, pushing him to his physical limits without regard for his bank account or social status. The workout began with a brutal series of sprints on the treadmill, followed by compound movements designed to engage multiple muscle groups simultaneously. David barked instructions and encouragement in equal measure, forcing Marcus to focus on nothing but the burning in his muscles and the rhythm of his breathing. For 90 minutes, Marcus existed in a world where quarterly reports and acquisition strategies didn't matter. Pain became his sole focus, each repetition and sprint driving him deeper into the blessed mindlessness of physical exertion. This was the closest thing to peace he could find. By the time they finished, sweat soaked through his shirt, and his legs felt like liquid rubber. David handed him a towel and a protein shake, studying his face with professional concern. "You're pushing too hard," David said. "Even professional athletes need rest days." "I'm fine," Marcus replied automatically, though he knew the trainer was right. He had been using exercise as a drug, seeking higher doses of exhaustion to achieve the same numbing effect. "Your wife wouldn't want you destroying yourself," David said quietly. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. David rarely mentioned Eleanor, understanding instinctively that the subject remained too raw for casual conversation. But, occasionally, he offered these small reminders that self-destruction wasn't the same as healing. "I know," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. After showering in the gym's luxurious facilities, Marcus returned to his penthouse feeling marginally more human. The endorphins from his workout had temporarily lifted the fog of melancholy that seemed to follow him everywhere. He would take whatever relief he could find. The elevator opened directly into his foyer, where black and white marble tiles created geometric patterns beneath a crystal chandelier that Eleanor had discovered in a Prague antique shop. The chandelier had cost more than most people's cars, but Eleanor had fallen in love with its intricate design and insisted they ship it to New York. Marcus paused in the foyer, listening to the apartment's familiar sounds. The gentle hum of the central air system, the barely audible ticking of several antique clocks, the subtle creaking of a building that had stood for nearly a century. But, today, something was different. He could hear running water coming from somewhere deeper in the apartment. His first thought was of a plumbing emergency. The penthouse's vintage charm came with occasional infrastructure challenges, and Marcus had dealt with his share of burst pipes and temperamental fixtures over the years. But, as he listened more carefully, the sound seemed too steady and controlled to indicate a leak. Then, he remembered Rebecca's mention of the replacement housekeeper. Marcus walked toward the sound, his bare feet silent against the marble floors. The master suite occupied the apartment's eastern wing, connected to the main living areas by a corridor lined with Eleanor's collection of Impressionist paintings. As he approached his bedroom, the sound of running water grew louder and more distinct. It was definitely coming from the master bathroom. Marcus paused outside his bedroom door, suddenly, uncertain about how to proceed. Mrs. Rodriguez had always completed her work while he was at the office, maintaining the apartment's pristine condition without ever crossing paths with its owner. They had developed an unspoken understanding about boundaries and timing that had worked perfectly for 6 years. But this replacement clearly operated under different assumptions about the schedule. He knocked softly on the bedroom door, intending to announce his presence and avoid any awkward encounters. When no response came, he knocked more loudly, calling out a greeting. Still nothing. The sound of running water continued unabated. Concerned that the replacement might be elderly like Mrs. Rodriguez, and unable to hear him over the sound of the shower, Marcus pushed open the bedroom door. The familiar space looked exactly as he had left it, but steam was billowing from the master bathroom, confirming his suspicions about the source of the water sounds. Marcus approached the bathroom door, which stood slightly ajar, and called out again. "Hello? I'm the homeowner, and I wanted to let you know I'm here." When no response came, worry began to override his concern for propriety. What if the replacement had slipped and fallen in the shower? What if she needed medical attention? Marcus had read about elderly people suffering injuries in bathrooms, and he couldn't live with himself if someone was hurt in his home while he stood outside the door worrying about etiquette. He pushed the bathroom door open wider and stepped inside, intending to quickly check for signs of distress before retreating to allow the housekeeper to finish her work in privacy. What he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. The woman in his shower wasn't elderly like Mrs. Rodriguez. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with long dark hair that cascaded down her back in wet waves. Her profile was elegant and graceful, like something carved by a master sculptor. She stood beneath the rainfall showerhead with her eyes closed, completely unaware of his presence, lost in the simple pleasure of hot water cascading over her skin. Marcus tried to speak, to apologize and retreat, but his voice seemed to have abandoned him entirely. He stood frozen in the doorway, his brain struggling to process the unexpected scene before him. The bathroom's warm lighting cast everything in a golden glow, creating an almost dreamlike quality that made the moment feel surreal and disconnected from reality. She was beautiful in a way that bypassed intellectual appreciation and struck him directly in the chest like a physical force. Not the polished, manufactured beauty of the socialites who frequented his business functions, but something more natural and unguarded. Her skin seemed to glow in the bathroom's soft light, and there was something almost ethereal about the way she moved beneath the falling water. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Marcus forgot about appropriate behavior and social conventions. He forgot about his grief and his carefully maintained emotional walls. He simply existed in that steamy bathroom, watching this unexpected vision of beauty who had somehow appeared in his private sanctuary. Then, she opened her eyes and turned toward the bathroom door. Their gazes met across the steam-filled space, and Marcus felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates realigning after years of dormancy. Her eyes were the color of warm honey, wide with surprise, but not with fear. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved or spoke, caught in a moment of mutual recognition that seemed to transcend their awkward circumstances. "Oh," she said softly, her voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't immediately place. She made no effort to cover herself or scream, simply standing there meeting his gaze with surprising composure. "I'm sorry," Marcus finally managed, his voice rough with shock. "I heard the water and thought. I was worried someone might be hurt." She tilted her head slightly, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing past all his carefully constructed defenses. "You're Marcus Wellington." It wasn't a question, and the way she said his name, without the usual deference or calculation he heard from most people, sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "I am," he confirmed, still struggling to find his equilibrium. "And you're Sophia Reyes," she said, reaching for a towel with unhurried grace. "The agency sent me to replace Mrs. Rodriguez." As she wrapped the towel around herself, Marcus noticed the way she moved, confident and unashamed despite their compromising circumstances. Most people would have been mortified or angry, but Sophia seemed to regard their encounter with curiosity rather than distress. "I should let you finish," Marcus said, taking a step backward toward the door. But something kept him from leaving entirely, some magnetic pull that he hadn't felt in years. "I was almost finished anyway," Sophia said, tucking the towel securely around her body. "I hope you don't mind that I used your shower. The agency said the apartment had staff quarters, but I couldn't find them." "There aren't any," Marcus admitted. "My wife never wanted live-in help." The mention of Eleanor created a moment of awkward silence, and Marcus immediately regretted bringing up his deceased wife while standing in a bathroom with a half-naked woman he'd just met. But Sophia didn't seem uncomfortable with the reference. She had good instincts about privacy, Sophia said diplomatically. "I should have asked before using your facilities." "It's fine," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure anything about this situation could be considered fine. "I'll let you get dressed. We can discuss the work arrangements later." As he turned to leave, Sophia's voice stopped him. "Mr. Wellington?" He looked back to find her watching him with those honey-colored eyes, her expression thoughtful and strangely knowing. "Yes." Marcus sat in his home office for the next hour, staring at financial reports without absorbing a single number. The leather chair that had once been Eleanor's favorite reading spot now felt like a witness to his confusion. Every time he tried to focus on quarterly projections or merger documents, his mind drifted back to those honey-colored eyes and the way Sophia had said his name without the usual reverence or calculation he heard from everyone else. Through his office's glass doors, he could hear Sophia moving through the apartment, her footsteps lighter and more purposeful than Mrs. Rodriguez's cautious shuffling. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of her as she worked, dressed now in simple black pants and a white blouse that somehow looked elegant despite their obvious practicality. She moved through Eleanor's carefully curated spaces with respect, but without the fearful reverence that most people showed around such obvious wealth. When his phone rang, Marcus answered it absently, his attention still divided between spreadsheets and the sounds of domestic activity beyond his office. "Mr. Wellington?" Rebecca's voice carried its usual professional efficiency. "The Tokyo team is standing by for your conference call." Marcus glanced at his watch, surprised to discover that 2 hours had passed without his notice. "Put them through to my home office." The next 90 minutes disappeared into discussions of currency fluctuations and regulatory challenges in the Japanese market. Marcus found himself grateful for the familiar complexity of international business, the way numbers and strategies demanded his complete attention. By the time the call ended, he had almost convinced himself that the morning's encounter had been a temporary aberration, a brief moment of confusion that meant nothing. Then he opened his office door and found Sophia standing in the hallway, polishing one of Eleanor's antique mirrors with careful precision. "I hope the call went well," she said without looking up from her work. "I try to keep the noise down." "It was fine," Marcus replied, though he realized he couldn't remember half of what had been discussed. "You don't have to whisper around me. This is a home, not a museum." Sophia paused in her polishing, meeting his gaze in the mirror's reflection. Sometimes homes become museums when we're afraid of disturbing the memories. The observation was so unexpected and perceptive that Marcus felt momentarily winded. Most people either avoided mentioning Eleanor entirely or offered meaningless platitudes about moving on. But Sophia seemed to understand something deeper about grief and its tendency to preserve the past in amber. "You speak from experience," he said, not quite making it a question. "My grandmother's house remained exactly the same for 5 years after she died," Sophia said, returning to her work. "My grandfather wouldn't let anyone move so much as a coffee cup. He said changing anything would be like losing her twice. What happened to change his mind? I did, Sophia said simply. I told him that Abuela would be furious if she knew he was living in a shrine instead of a home. She always said houses were meant for living, not for mourning. Marcus studied Sophia's profile as she worked, noting the way her dark hair caught the hallway's soft lighting and the graceful economy of her movements. Everything about her suggested competence and quiet strength, qualities that he found surprisingly attractive after years of dealing with people who seemed to require constant validation and attention. How long have you been working for the agency? He asked, surprising himself with the question. 3 years, Sophia replied, moving to another mirror. Since I finished my degree. What did you study? Sophia glanced at him with amusement dancing in her eyes. Are you conducting a job interview, Mr. Wellington? The question made Marcus realize how unusual his curiosity was. He rarely engaged in personal conversation with service staff, not out of snobbery, but because he had learned that familiarity often led to complications. People began to expect special treatment or started sharing inappropriate details about their lives, forcing him into an uncomfortable role as either confessor or benefactor. But, with Sophia, his questions felt natural rather than obligatory. I suppose I am, he admitted. Mrs. Rodriguez, and I barely spoke in 6 years. Literature and art history, Sophia said, answering his earlier question. Not exactly practical degrees, but they taught me to pay attention to details and appreciate beauty when I find it. She gestured toward the antique mirror she was cleaning, its ornate silver frame reflecting the hallway's artwork with crystal clarity. Your wife had exquisite taste. This mirror is 18th century Venetian, isn't it? Marcus nodded, surprised by her knowledge. Eleanor found it in a shop in Venice during our honeymoon. She said it had been waiting for the right home. She was right, Sophia said softly. It belongs here. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating the mirror and the memories it represented. Marcus found himself remembering Eleanor's excitement when they discovered the piece, the way she had negotiated with the Italian antique dealer in a mixture of English and enthusiastic hand gestures. He hadn't thought about that particular memory in months, but Sophia's presence seemed to unlock details he had forgotten. I should let you work, Marcus said finally, though he felt strangely reluctant to return to his office. Actually, Sophia said, setting down her polishing cloth, I wanted to ask about the library. The agency said you have an extensive collection, but I wasn't sure about the proper way to clean leather-bound books. Marcus felt a spark of interest. The library had been Eleanor's pride and joy, a 2-story room lined with first editions and rare manuscripts she had collected throughout their marriage. Since her death, he had avoided the space almost entirely, finding it too heavy with memories of afternoons spent reading together by the fireplace. I'll show you, he said, leading Sophia toward the apartment's west wing. The library's double doors opened to reveal floor-to-ceiling bookshelves connected by a spiral staircase that Eleanor had insisted was absolutely necessary for the proper library atmosphere. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating thousands of volumes organized according to Eleanor's personal system that somehow managed to be both logical and whimsical. Sophia stepped into the room with visible reverence, her eyes scanning the impressive collection with genuine appreciation rather than the calculating assessment he usually saw from visitors trying to estimate the monetary value of his possessions. This is incredible, she said, moving toward a section of poetry volumes. First edition Neruda, early Dickinson, a signed copy of Leaves of Grass. She turned to Marcus with obvious admiration. Your wife must have been extraordinary. She was, Marcus said simply, watching Sophia examine the books with the careful attention of someone who understood their significance. Literature was her passion. She taught high school English before we married. What made her stop teaching? The question caught Marcus off guard. Most people assumed Eleanor had given up work to become a society wife, attending charity luncheons and hosting dinner parties for his business associates. But the truth was more complicated and more personal. She didn't stop immediately, Marcus said, settling into one of the library's leather armchairs. She kept teaching for the first 2 years of our marriage. But then, he paused, realizing he was about to share something he had never discussed with anyone, not even his closest friends. Sophia waited patiently, her attention focused entirely on his words rather than the valuable books surrounding them. She had a miscarriage, Marcus continued. We had been trying for children, and, when it happened, she went through a period where being around teenagers became too painful. She took a leave of absence that became permanent. Sophia's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating for both of you. It changed her, Marcus said. She threw herself into collecting books and supporting literacy programs. The foundation she established still provides scholarships for underprivileged students who want to study literature. She found another way to teach, Sophia observed. The insight was so perfectly apt that Marcus felt a sudden tightness in his throat. Eleanor had indeed found another way to teach, supporting dozens of young scholars who might not otherwise have had access to quality education. But Marcus had never articulated it quite that way, never seen his wife's philanthropic work as an extension of her teaching career. Yes, he said quietly. She did. Sophia moved to another section of the library, running her fingers along the spines of books with obvious affection. My mother was a teacher too. In Colombia, before we came to America. She said books were the only thing that made moving worth it, because stories translate even when everything else gets lost. You're from Colombia? Bogota, Sophia confirmed. We came here when I was 12. My mother wanted me to have opportunities she never had. Is that why you studied literature? Sophia smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. Partly, but mostly because I fell in love with the way writers could make words do impossible things. Create entire worlds, make strangers feel less alone, turn pain into something beautiful. Marcus found himself studying Sophia's face as she spoke, noting the passion that animated her features when she discussed literature. It reminded him of Eleanor's enthusiasm when she discovered a new author or reread a beloved classic. Both women possessed the rare ability to find genuine excitement in ideas and beauty, a quality that seemed increasingly rare in his world of calculated social interactions. Would you like me to show you the proper way to care for the books? Marcus offered, surprising himself again with the suggestion. For the next hour, they worked together cleaning and organizing the library's collection. Marcus found himself explaining Eleanor's cataloging system while Sophia listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about particular authors and editions. Their conversation flowed naturally from literature to art to travel, revealing a depth of knowledge and curiosity that impressed him. As they worked, Marcus began to notice small details about Sophia that intrigued him. The way she handled each book with careful respect, as if it were a living thing rather than an object. The slight accent that became more pronounced when she was excited about a particular topic. The graceful way she moved around the library's furniture, never bumping into tables or knocking over the delicate objects Eleanor had scattered throughout the room. Your wife collected beautiful things, Sophia said, examining a small bronze sculpture of a dancer that Eleanor had discovered in a Parisian flea market. She said beautiful objects made life more bearable, Marcus replied. She believed in surrounding herself with things that brought joy. Smart woman, Sophia said. Too many people think aesthetics are superficial, but I think they're essential. Beauty reminds us that life is worth living, even when everything seems difficult. The comment hit Marcus with unexpected force. Since Eleanor's death, he had surrounded himself with the trappings of success rather than beauty, filling his days with profitable but joyless activities that kept him busy without making him happy. He couldn't remember the last time he had looked at one of Eleanor's carefully chosen objects and felt anything other than loss. But watching Sophia appreciate the bronze dancer, seeing the way her face lit up as she discovered each new treasure in the library, Marcus felt a stirring of something he had thought was permanently dormant. Not just attraction, though Sophia's physical beauty was undeniable, but a deeper recognition of someone who understood the importance of finding magic in everyday moments. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself increasingly reluctant to end their time together. When Sophia suggested they break for lunch, he impulsively invited her to join him rather than eating alone as he usually did. I don't want to intrude on your privacy, Sophia said diplomatically. You're not intruding, Marcus replied, realizing the truth of the statement. Besides, I was going to order something anyway, and It's no trouble to order for two. They ate lunch at the kitchen island, sharing Thai food from Marcus's favorite restaurant while discussing everything from Colombian literature to New York's art museums. Sophia proved to be an engaging conversationalist, offering insights and asking questions that challenged his assumptions about topics he thought he understood completely. As they talked, Marcus found himself laughing for the first time in months, genuinely amused by Sophia's stories about her early days in America and her struggles to understand cultural references that her classmates took for granted. She possessed a gift for finding humor in difficult situations without minimizing their impact, a quality that put him at ease in ways he hadn't expected. "I should get back to work," Sophia said finally, glancing at the kitchen clock. "I still need to finish the guest bedrooms." "Of course," Marcus said, though he felt disappointed by the reminder that she was here in a professional capacity rather than as a guest. As Sophia gathered their lunch dishes, Marcus found himself watching her movements again, noting the unconscious grace with which she handled even mundane tasks. Everything about her suggested competence and quiet confidence, qualities that he found increasingly attractive. "Sophia," he said as she turned to leave the kitchen. She paused in the doorway, looking back at him with those honey-colored eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Thank you," he said, "for the conversation. It's been a while since I've talked about Eleanor with someone who didn't know her." Sophia's expression softened with understanding. "Sometimes it's easier to share memories with strangers. We don't have to protect them from our grief." Once again, her insight struck him as remarkably perceptive. Marcus had indeed spent the past 3 years protecting friends and family members from the full weight of his sorrow, offering sanitized versions of his emotional state rather than admitting how completely lost he felt without Eleanor. But with Sophia, he had found himself speaking honestly about his wife's dreams and disappointments, sharing details he had never voiced aloud. Perhaps it was because she was a stranger, as she suggested, or perhaps it was something else entirely. As Sophia disappeared into the apartment's guest wing, Marcus remained in the kitchen, contemplating the unexpected turn his day had taken. When he woke up that morning, his biggest concern had been surviving another round of meaningless business meetings. Now he found himself looking forward to Sophia's presence in his home, eager for their next conversation in ways that both excited and alarmed him. The realization that he was attracted to his housekeeper should have been troubling, but Marcus found himself more curious than concerned. For 3 years, he had felt emotionally numb, going through the motions of living without experiencing any genuine connection to the world around him. Sophia's presence had awakened something in him that he had assumed was permanently buried with Eleanor. The thought should have felt like a betrayal, but instead it felt like the first hopeful thing that had happened to him in years. Perhaps Sophia was right about their encounter not being a mistake. Perhaps some meetings were meant to happen, regardless of how unlikely or inappropriate they might seem on the surface. That evening, Marcus found himself pacing the apartment like a caged animal, unable to concentrate on the financial reports spread across his desk. Sophia had finished her work for the day and left around 6 o'clock, but her presence seemed to linger in every room she had touched. The apartment felt different somehow, more alive despite being empty again. He kept returning to their conversation in the library, the way Sophia had spoken about beauty and literature with such genuine passion. When was the last time he had discussed something meaningful with another person? Most of his interactions centered around profit margins and market strategies, conversations that engaged his intellect, but left his soul untouched. Marcus poured himself 2 fingers of 20-year-old scotch and settled into Eleanor's favorite chair by the library fireplace. The leather still smelled faintly of her perfume, a ghost of gardenia and vanilla that usually brought more pain than comfort. But tonight, surrounded by the books that Sophia had handled with such reverence, the scent felt like a blessing rather than a curse. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Catherine, who lived in London with her husband and 2 young children. She had been checking on him with increasing frequency since the 3rd anniversary of Eleanor's death, worried that his isolation was becoming permanent. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Are you still among the living?" Marcus smiled despite himself. Catherine had inherited their mother's sharp wit and complete inability to tolerate self-pity. She had been Eleanor's closest friend before becoming Marcus's sister-in-law, and She missed Eleanor almost as much as he did. He typed back, "Alive and surprisingly well. How are James and the kids?" The response came immediately, exhausted but happy. "James wants to know if you're coming for Christmas this year, or if we should mail your gifts to the hermit cave." Marcus had spent the last 2 Christmases alone, claiming work obligations that everyone knew were fabricated. The thought of celebrating holidays without Eleanor had seemed impossible, too painful to endure even with people who loved him. But, as he sat in the library where he and Sophia had spent the afternoon, Marcus found himself considering the possibility. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding from life, to rejoin the world of human connections and shared experiences. "I'll think about it," he typed, which was more than he had been able to promise in previous years. Catherine's response was immediate. "Progress. What's brought on this miraculous change of heart?" Marcus stared at the question for several minutes, unsure how to answer. He could hardly explain that meeting his new housekeeper had awakened something in him that 3 years of grief counseling and well-meaning friends had failed to touch. "Maybe I'm finally ready to stop hiding," he wrote instead. "About time. Eleanor would have strangled you by now if she could see how you've been living." The comment made Marcus laugh out loud, a sound that echoed strangely in the quiet library. Catherine was absolutely right. Eleanor had possessed no patience for wallowing or self-pity, believing that life was too short and too precious to waste on prolonged sorrow. She would indeed have been furious with him for turning their home into a mausoleum and himself into a ghost. As if summoned by his thoughts, Marcus's eyes fell on one of Eleanor's journals, tucked between volumes of poetry on a nearby shelf. She had kept detailed journals throughout their marriage, filling leather-bound books with observations about their travels, thoughts on books she was reading, and plans for their future together. Marcus had never read them after her death, too afraid of what he might find or how much pain they might contain. But tonight, fortified by scotch and the lingering warmth of his afternoon with Sophia, he pulled the journal from its place on the shelf. The book fell open to an entry dated just 2 months before Eleanor's cancer diagnosis, when she was still healthy and full of plans for their 10th wedding anniversary. "Marcus worries too much," she had written in her flowing handwriting. "He thinks happiness is fragile, something that can be destroyed by a single moment of inattention. I keep trying to tell him that joy is more resilient than he believes, that it can survive almost anything if we're brave enough to keep looking for it." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, so perfectly capturing his fundamental nature that he felt exposed despite being alone. Eleanor had seen through his protective pessimism to the fear beneath it, his terror that anything good in his life would inevitably be taken away. He flipped through more pages, finding entry after entry that revealed the depth of Eleanor's understanding of his character. She had loved him not despite his flaws but because of them, seeing his protective instincts and emotional guardedness as evidence of how deeply he was capable of caring. "Had dinner with Catherine tonight," read another entry. "She asked what I would want for Marcus if something happened to me. I told her I'd want him to be happy, to find someone who could make him laugh the way he used to when we first met. She thought I was being morbid, but I know Marcus. He'll try to preserve our love like a museum exhibit if I'm not careful. I need him to understand that the best way to honor what we had is to remain open to what he might find next." Marcus closed the journal with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the clarity of Eleanor's final gift to him. Even facing her own mortality, she had been more concerned with his future happiness than with preserving the sanctity of their marriage. She had given him permission to move forward, to find joy again without guilt or apology. The realization should have brought relief, but instead it filled Marcus with a complex mixture of gratitude and grief that he wasn't sure how to process. For 3 years, he had been honoring a version of Eleanor's memory that she herself would have rejected, turning their love into a cage rather than a foundation for whatever came next. The next morning, Marcus woke with unusual anticipation, eager to see Sophia again despite telling himself that his interest was purely friendly. He dressed more carefully than usual, choosing a soft gray sweater and dark jeans instead of his typical business attire. If Sophia noticed the change, she didn't comment on it. She arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing a simple blue dress that somehow managed to look both professional and elegant. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, revealing the graceful line of her neck and the small silver earrings that caught the morning light. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," she said, setting her thermos on the kitchen counter. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought my own coffee. I'm very particular about the strength." "It's Marcus," he corrected automatically. "And I don't mind at all. What would you like to tackle today?" Sophia consulted a small notebook she pulled from her purse, her movements efficient but unhurried. "The dining room needs attention, and Mrs. Rodriguez left notes about rotating the art collection. Apparently, you have pieces in storage that should be displayed periodically." Marcus had forgotten about the art rotation, something Eleanor had insisted upon to keep the apartment's aesthetic fresh and interesting. Since her death, he had left everything exactly as it was, creating the static museum atmosphere that Sophia had so accurately identified. "The storage room is in the basement," Marcus said. "I could show you if you'd like." Something flickered across Sophia's face, an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "That would be helpful, but are you sure you want to be involved? Most employers prefer to leave household management to the staff." "I'm not most employers," Marcus said, which earned him one of Sophia's rare full smiles. They took the elevator down to the building's basement level, where Marcus maintained a climate-controlled storage room for artwork, furniture, and other valuable items that didn't fit in the apartment's current configuration. He hadn't been down there in over a year, and dust motes danced in the fluorescent lighting as he unlocked the heavy door. The space was larger than most New York apartments, filled with carefully wrapped paintings, sculptures, and pieces of furniture covered in protective cloth. Eleanor had cataloged everything with meticulous detail, creating a system that allowed for easy rotation and maintenance of their collection. Sophia moved through the space with obvious appreciation, occasionally lifting the corner of a cloth covering to peek at hidden treasures. "Your wife had incredible taste," she said, uncovering a vibrant abstract painting that Marcus recognized as one of Eleanor's earliest purchases. "She said collecting art was like curating happiness," Marcus replied, watching Sophia examine the painting with professional interest. She believed beautiful objects could change the energy of a space. She was right, Sophia said, moving to another covered piece. "May I?" Marcus nodded, and Sophia carefully removed the cloth to reveal a bronze sculpture of a woman reading, her face serene with concentration. The piece was one of Eleanor's favorites, though she had moved it to storage when they redecorated the library. "This is exquisite," Sophia breathed, running her fingers along the sculpture's smooth lines. The artist captured something so intimate about the act of reading. You can almost see the thoughts forming behind her eyes. Marcus found himself watching Sophia's face rather than the sculpture, noting the way her expression softened with genuine admiration. Eleanor used to say the same thing. She kept it in the library for years. Why did she move it? The question was simple, but it opened a door to memories that Marcus had kept carefully locked away. "She was having trouble reading toward the end," he said quietly. "The medications made it hard for her to concentrate, and seeing the sculpture made her feel inadequate, I suppose." Sophia's hand stilled on the bronze, her expression shifting to something deeper than mere sympathy. That must have been devastating for someone who loved literature so much. It was, Marcus confirmed. Reading had always been her escape, her source of comfort. When she lost that ability, it felt like losing herself twice. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, both contemplating the sculpture and the loss it represented. Marcus found himself grateful that Sophia didn't offer platitudes or try to minimize Eleanor's suffering. Instead, she simply acknowledged the weight of what had been lost. "Would you like to bring it back upstairs?" Sophia asked eventually. Sometimes returning beautiful things to their proper place can be a form of healing. The suggestion should have felt overwhelming, but instead Marcus found it oddly appealing. Perhaps it was time to stop preserving Eleanor's final months and start celebrating the years of joy that had preceded them. "Yes," he said. "I think Eleanor would like that." They spent the next 2 hours selecting pieces to rotate into the apartment, with Sophia offering thoughtful suggestions about placement and lighting. She had an intuitive understanding of how different works would interact with the apartment's existing decor, proposing combinations that Marcus wouldn't have considered but immediately recognized as brilliant. As they worked, their conversation ranged from art history to travel stories, with Sophia sharing anecdotes about museums she had visited and artists she admired. Marcus found himself telling her about trips he and Eleanor had taken to acquire specific pieces, stories he hadn't shared with anyone since her death. "You light up when you talk about her," Sophia observed as they positioned the reading sculpture in the library's main seating area. "Do I?" Marcus asked, surprised by the comment. "Yes," Sophia said simply. "It's beautiful to see. Some people speak about their lost loved ones with only sadness, but you remember the joy too." The observation struck Marcus as profoundly accurate. Somewhere during their morning together, talking about Eleanor had shifted from painful to celebratory, focusing on the happiness they had shared rather than the tragedy of its ending. "She would have liked you," Marcus said impulsively, then immediately worried that the comment might make Sophia uncomfortable. But Sophia's face lit up with pleasure at the compliment. "I would have liked her too, I think. Anyone who could create all this," she gestured around the library, "must have been extraordinary." As they finished arranging the artwork, Marcus found himself reluctant to let the morning end. Working alongside Sophia felt natural and comfortable in ways that surprised him, as if they had been collaborating for years rather than days. "Would you like some lunch?" he asked as they returned to the kitchen. "I was thinking of trying that new Italian place that opened down the street." Sophia paused in washing her hands, glancing at him with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Wellington." "Marcus," she corrected herself. "I need to ask you something." The serious tone of her voice made Marcus's stomach clench with sudden anxiety. "Of course. Are you asking me to lunch as your employee, or as something else?" The directness of the question caught Marcus completely off guard. He had been so focused on enjoying Sophia's company that he hadn't examined his own motivations too carefully. But, forced to confront them now, he realized that his interest in Sophia had indeed shifted beyond the professional. "I'm not sure," he admitted honestly. "I know I enjoy talking with you, and I know that's unusual for me. I haven't wanted to spend time with anyone in 3 years." Sophia studied his face with those penetrating honey-colored eyes, as if she could read his intentions in his expression. "I need you to be sure," she said quietly, "because I have to work, and I can't afford to complicate my employment situation." The comment reminded Marcus of the vast disparity in their circumstances, something he had been unconsciously ignoring. For him, their developing friendship was an unexpected pleasure. For Sophia, it could represent a threat to her livelihood and professional reputation. "You're right," he said, though the admission felt like swallowing broken glass. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have blurred the lines." But, as he turned to leave the kitchen, Sophia's voice stopped him. "Marcus," she said softly, "I didn't say I wasn't interested. I just said I need you to be sure." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Marcus turned back to find Sophia watching him with an expression that was both vulnerable and determined, as if she had decided to take a leap of faith despite the obvious risks. "I am interested," Marcus said quietly. "More interested than I have any right to be." "Then, let's have lunch," Sophia replied, her smile transforming her entire face. But not as employer and employee, as two people who might be starting something neither of us expected. As they left the apartment together, Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded him of being 16 and asking someone on his first date. He had no idea where this unexpected connection with Sophia might lead, but for the first time since Eleanor's death, he found himself eager to find out. The thought would have terrified him a week ago. Today, it felt like the first step toward reclaiming his life. As the afternoon light began to fade beyond the kitchen windows, Marcus found himself anticipating the evening ahead with something approaching excitement rather than his usual dread. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't alone in the apartment, and the difference felt more significant than it should have. He told himself it was simply the novelty of having someone to talk to. But even as he formed the thought, Marcus knew he was lying to himself. His attraction to Sophia was deeper and more complicated than simple loneliness, touching parts of him that had been dormant since Eleanor's death. The question that remained was what, if anything, he planned to do about it. "I don't think this was a mistake," she said quietly. The words hung in the steamy air between them, loaded with implications that Marcus wasn't ready to examine. Without responding, He left the bathroom and closed the door behind him, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. Marcus walked to his bedroom windows and stared out at the city, trying to process what had just happened. In 3 years of carefully maintained solitude, no woman had affected him the way Sofia Reyes had in those few moments. He told himself it was simply shock, the unexpected nature of their encounter that had thrown him off balance. But, as he stood there waiting for his pulse to return to normal, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Sofia was right. Perhaps their meeting hadn't been a mistake at all. Perhaps it was something else entirely, something that frightened him more than he was willing to admit.